Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Atkinson. I'm a programmer here at the MCA, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the MCA to today's event, Talk Chicago Performs Artists. Round of applause. Hey, all right, there we go. Held in conjunction with our second annual iteration of Chicago Performs. Thank you all for coming, and thank you also to our generous funders, a full list of which you can see here. Love that magic. Thank you in the back. Before we get to the conversation, a reminder to please turn off your phones. Everyone can check their phones quick. Unless, of course, you're using it for captioning. You can just click on this QR code to get real-time captioning. A few words about today's event. Chicago Performs is a series that celebrates the wealth of innovative work being made by Chicagoans today by inviting 3 to 4 local artists to share new works of performance, including pieces developed through the MCA's In Progress series and New Works initiative. Bringing together work across genres and career stages, Chicago Performs supports artists who are entering a new phase of their practice, whether stepping onto a larger stage for the first time, exploring new directions, or expanding the scale of their projects, and offers the public an unprecedented chance to witness the city's groundbreaking performance artists in action. Chicago Performs is organized by Tara Aisha Willis, former MCA curator, with Laura Page Kyber, curatorial associate, with extended support by Performance and Programs Project Manager, Sandy Gutman. I see you, Sandy. Where are you, Sandy? Well, she did a lot of work for this. This year's Chicago Performs includes 3 incredible artists, you see here, Jonas Becker, Angela Shanda, and Irene Shao, whose list of accolades is quite long, but you can see in partial form here. The 3 works presented at MCA showcase the breadth and depth of performance in Chicago. New Normal by Jonas Becker explores how we, as individuals in society, adjust to large-scale cultural trauma, environmental deterioration, the loss of civil liberties, and increased financial precarity. The Next Cup of Tea is a solo dance theater performance by Angel that investigates how to make sense of the never-ending impulses that run through our 2 pages. Heads, our everyday moments, and our contradictory experiences. This part of Chicago Performs is temporarily postponed, with a rescheduled date as soon as we can provide it to be announced. Blue Alice is a durational movement piece by dancer and choreographer Irene Shao, with a sculptural costume made of tarp and mylar. Shao continuously shapeshifts throughout the performance. The artists are joined on stage by Laura Page Kyber, to my left, for a moderated conversation, linking the threads and key differences between each of their practices. If you can all please join me and welcome them now to the MCA stage.
Hello. Thank you for that introduction, Daniel. My name is Laura Page. I work in performance here at the MCA. Thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you up here with me. Thank you all for coming out and joining us as well. I want to begin by just thanking you each for your deeply thoughtful works in this year's series. It's been really wonderful to work with each of you and witness your processes unfolding. I also want to mention that there are complete program notes available online that you can find on our website, where you can read those bios in full, and also interviews that I conducted earlier with each of these artists individually. So I hope you'll dig into some more context there as well. With that, I will try my very best not to repeat any of the questions that I've already asked you in those previous interviews. And my hope is that with this conversation, we can continue those conversations, merge them together, and hopefully have this be a conversation between the 3 of you more than anything else. And at the end, there'll be some time for questions from the audience as well. This is our second annual series for Chicago Performs, and last year in 2022, it was sort of on the heels of the pandemic and being in quarantine. There was a lot of time to reflect, lots of calls for change, and then there was just a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about bringing performance back to the MCA. But now, a year later, it really feels like we have, turned a new page. The atmosphere is very different. It seems like we're thinking about activity in public is ramping back up. We're thinking about what we're going to hold on to and what we're going to let go of. And performance, can be so many things, right? It can be entertainment, it can be an escape, it can be, for some, a moment of recognition or catharsis or healing. It can hold a mirror to society. But I think with each of these projects, in very different ways, each of you seem to be inviting audiences to take pause, to slow down, to resist or question that first glance understanding of what they're experiencing in your work. So I guess to get us started and lay some groundwork, I think that many of the folks in this room may have seen some of the pieces, but certainly not all of them. And for all of us, none of us have gotten a chance to see Angel's work. Let me just pause to acknowledge the shoe boot. Angel's performance has unfortunately been postponed due to an injury, but new dates are forthcoming, so stay tuned. So if you could just start by giving us a very brief description of the experiences you all are crafting for the audience with these pieces, and maybe, what you're hoping audiences might pause to reflect on in each of your works. Anyone can start, whoever feels inspired.
So between last night and later this afternoon, if you're coming to see the performance at 2 p.m., for me, New Normal is really about taking a closer look at slow violence, to say it succinctly. I think that when things happen all of a sudden, when there's a big event or a news headline, often that garners a lot of attention, maybe a lot of action, hopefully. But I think the things that shift slowly over time, to me, in some ways, are the most dangerous. Or maybe there's not a comparison, but are also dangerous and sometimes go unnoticed. And so for me, this performance is really about thinking about our agency around slow violence.
Irene or Angel?
My piece, The Next Cup of Tea, my succinct prepared answer is not here with me today, but it's honestly, it's a piece that is really trying to weave and braid together a lot of different impulses, and it's a piece that has emerged from sort of following and honoring impulse. So rather than a sort of planned, crafted show, it's sort of anchored in improvisational energy, but also a sort of spacious time taking around discerning what are the sort of inner grumblings that we are sort of sitting with and sifting through on a daily basis. So it's a project that, on one hand is interested in the sort of internal world, the emotions, the feelings, the reckonings, the contradictions, the things that we're grappling with internally, but in conversation with the sort of material, architectural space, and the energy of sort of holding a teacup and the container of sitting with whatever that drink might be that fine afternoon, as you are then also, allowing that sort of physical anchor to open you up into all that you're exploring on the inside.
What is the experience you're crafting in your piece? Yeah.
I'm not sure. I feel like that's a question to ask the people who attended. So for me, Blue Alice began as an exploration of material and color in the space of the museum. It's also a response to architecture and to the artworks that I'm able to access in the public spaces of the museum.
Yeah, so, I think each of you have sort of, in your own way, indicated the various levels of improvisation that are core to each of your works. And each of them have an iterativeness and ongoingness. They shift and morph every night with every new audience. I just wonder what is revealed to you in each sort of improvised experiment. Like, how do the conditions of each moment change your understanding of what the work is? Go ahead.
So I also feel that for me, my experiments are often about observing other people. So I come into every performance of Blue Alice with a lot of questions about how the energy of the room is going to shift my work. Because I do feel that the work is created by not just me, but by those in attendance and in the spaces we encounter, and in the events that occur there, which are not necessarily controlled by me.
So New Normal is performed to endurance. So every performance is completely different, and each of the areas of the work are a choice for performers. So as a director, I'm also in the audience. So every time I watch it, I feel like I'm continually surprised, just kind of watching the different decision making that the ensemble is going through. And I think in some ways it's just such a joy to see like different moments come out at different nights, see certain people kind of have these like bursts of energy or bursts of tiredness. I think both are equally, like for me, surprising and enjoyable to watch. I think that the piece allows for so much agency in terms of who's performing it, that I just feel like it's sort of a constant shift of certain things emerging, sometimes taking on new meaning that I even intended, and being able to kind of hopefully be aware enough as somebody watching and crafting the piece to pick up on those changes and really amplify them. Maybe one example is there's a gesture that's in the work now that wasn't previously in the work, which is something that came out of rehearsal and just kind of watching a run through of the work and performers doing something that wasn't crafted at all, and then being kind of at least present enough to observe this gift that I was being given that was like, oh wow, if I can, just see this, and it became part of the piece.
Yeah, my work has a lot of sort of structured containers for improvisation, movement-wise, most obviously. And then also hum is a really strong element where I'm sort of spontaneously just, finding the sort of melody that sort of emerges in the way hums tend to do. And so there's this kind of honoring of this kind of, I don't know if accidental is the right word, but the sort of, sometimes hums just find you. Like, you don't usually like set out to start humming. They kind of show up. And so the sort of energy of that element that I play with in collaboration with a pianist in my piece is a very sort of well, those are the elements that are most obviously improvised. But I think that there's another big aspect of the piece that is just exploring the notion of presence and the notion that like we show up again and again to like our kitchen table, and then we place our water bottle. Like, it might be the same water bottle, it might be the same teacup, but we sort of place it in different spots, and it interacts with like the book that we pulled out of our backpack, or the pencils that are laying around, and then again most pressingly, these like very mundane objects are interacting with the sort of just like gnawing thought flow And so in that sense, to be present with all of that is the act of just showing up and allowing the iterative energy of life to just be like, and here we are again, and here we are again, and what's different now that we're here again?
Yeah, I mean, I also want to just say, like, how, for me, working with each of you over the course of the summer it's become very apparent to me how the life of a performance project is so much longer than what we see on the stage. And, you know, Anjal, what you would have performed this time would have been different than whatever it is that you perform when we do it in the future. And that's just been something that I have realized in a new way watching the three of you work this summer. So yeah. I also think that each of you in your own ways has a very specific relationship between the body and objects or materials. You know, Jonas, for you, there are these wooden planks on the stage. There are the cement blocks. There are the rocks. Anjal, you have these polygonal shapes that you're working with, and we've talked about your interest in how things are made and built. Irene, you have a fabulous dress. You are also intentionally in relationship to art objects around you. I'm just wondering if you could each give me a sense of what goes into your inspiration behind creating those elements and how those have come to be a part of the work.
Yeah, I can share. Coming back to what I was saying earlier about just like impulse, like just being like, what's the impulse right now? And that's kind of how initially I think some of the material designs of my work emerged. So sort of like, here's a piece of construction paper. What's my impulse if I were to like cut it up, and in what direction or what zigzag, or what is the impulse of my thoughts when it's like thinking about this and now I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about this, and like the ways in which like cutting up paper and shapes and the zigzags can kind of correlate to some of that energy. That's kind of how some of my materials emerged. I can say more, but that's a plenty starting.
So I think for the most part, the materials that I'm using in New Normal are meant to create a direct tie to the natural environment, recognizing that the natural environment is something that is inextricably linked to the ways that humans use that environment. And so some of the elements are maybe rocks that are found, whereas other elements that you see on stage are rocks that are embedded in cement, wood, excuse me, sorry, I got a little close, wood that's been cut and timbered for use by humans in construction. And so I think it's meant to reference this, the way humans are interacting with our environment, to tie the piece to questions around climate change and environmental destruction.
I really draw these materials from very specific encounters that I had. So the concept behind the Blue Alice dress occurred because I was invited to perform at the Ragdale Ring. Every summer they have an architecture competition for someone to build a temporary work of architecture on their grounds. And since my work is site and object responsive, I said, okay, I'm not going to make a dance and bring it here. I have to see the architecture and then I'll create the dance. So I drove to Ragdale and the architect hadn't actually built anything yet. So but I could see, they'd shown me drawings of their designs, and some of the materials they had were laid out, including a bright orange carpet that they had unrolled to flatten it. And on top of the carpet, there was this magnificent blue tarp. And I thought, well, I said, oh, is the tarp part of the design? And they said, oh, no, it's not. And I said, great, I'm going to wear a tarp. For sure, that's going to be my costume. So then, and they also had these like sections of their work that were made of mirrored vinyl. So I was talking with my collaborator, Vin Reed, about my desire to wear a tarp dress. I was going to like staple it together or hot glue it together or do something like that. And he was like, tarp dress, that sounds really interesting. So we started talking more about what this could be. And in another project that I had done at the Art Institute, it was Philippe Paranau's My Room is Another Fishbowl. And I would go in there and dance every day with the fish, which were actually Mylar balloons. So this was kind of an obsession of mine that no one really understood. Everyone just thought this was like totally insane, because I was going as a visitor, not as an invited performer to do this. So the mirrored vinyl kind of got translated into Mylar in the work. And although this is getting a little bit ahead, I had received a dress that he had made for someone else. It was just sort of a leftover dress that he'd made for the singer Katie Caden to sing the Star Spangled Banner at Soldier Field in 2020, May 2020. And I guess for whatever reason, she didn't wind up using that dress, so he gave it to me. And I improvised with it for a performance and made these sculptural forms with it. And after that and that dress also happened to be blue. Coincidence? Who knows? And so after I did that performance, we were discussing what would be the possibility of a dress that could hold the form that I was creating afterwards. Yeah, so.
Well, you ended there on something that I love so much about Blue Alice, is the sort of sculptural nature of the dress and how she is, both living human performer, but also sculptural object. And to me, that is the thing that I pause to question every time I watch a new iteration of Blue Alice, is like, how are we defining art? Where art can be in a building like this one? What are the norms of engaging with different types of art? And so I really welcome those questions that you present in the work as well. You also mentioned your collaboration with Ven, and so I wonder if it's an opportune moment to talk about each of your collaborators on these pieces. You mentioned your work with Sharon earlier, Angel, the pianist. And I believe, Jonas, some of your collaborators are here in the audience. So if you'd like to talk about your collaborations in these projects and how they've necessarily shifted your works, or even invite them to say a few words, that would be great.
I'm like, where are they?
I thought I saw someone, maybe not.
I was like, if they're up here, they should be downstairs. Your call was at 11 a.m. in the theater. Anyways, yeah, New Normal has had a really shifting relationship to collaboration. And I would, one of the things that's just been really important throughout the piece is everybody who's been involved with New Normal. And maybe just to take a step back, the piece, I think we referenced this a little bit earlier, but the piece first started in 2019 and was presented first here for an in progress. So it was presented in this large atrium that's just out here. And that piece, the ensemble, was different than what you would see if you go see the piece later this afternoon. That piece really started very organically. It was my studio assistant was the first performer. He called a friend, they called a friend, and then we had 6 people. And that iteration of the piece was created really with this very like dialogic process. We would talk, and that would inform these things that we would try out in terms of movement. And now, 4 years later, working with the same ideas, a lot of the same choreography, some of the same structure, it was really important for me to shift who I was working with. I really wanted to invite back anybody who had been part of that first conversation to rejoin the work, and a couple of people were still available to do that, still here in Chicago. So you'll see a couple of those performers. And then it was also really important for me to shift the cast to focus on issues of transgender identity and representation. There's something that I can just tell the story because our interview is hidden in the deep depths of the internet. But I guess it was like right before I was really diving deep into this work, I was driving back. I drive to West Virginia pretty frequently. I was driving back, stayed with a friend in Louisville, Kentucky, and we went to a drag show, and it was the last drag show that was going to happen before a ban on drag was about to be passed, and there was this tremendous amount of joy, which is maybe the part of what I'm saying that will be surprising, but tremendous amount of joy and tremendous amount of sorrow. And I felt like, as an artist who identifies as transgender, it felt more urgent than maybe it had in the past to bring those issues into my work. It's not something I've addressed in my work previously. And so when I came back and decided to cast the work, I wanted to cast the work with all of the new performers being transmasculine identified. All of the performers in general identify as masculine. And so that shifted. We were talking about collaboration, and that really shifted the kind of collaboration, the kind of conversations that we had, and really changed the way the work reads, changed the work even in its content. And so I think that there's no 2 performances of this that would ever be the same, and if the cast changes, the piece changes.
Collaboration. My project is, sort of largely developed as a solo dance theater project. My collaborators have oftentimes been more a peripheral part of my explorations, and increasingly more and more integrated. To sort of jump on the earlier conversation of material design, I've worked with David Aforiamwa, who's a Ghanaian American product designer who just so delightfully was able to translate what I described before as this like sort of impulse around cutting paper and like shifting my teacups around a table to these larger sort of cutouts of cardboard and acrylic and wood, as large scale as, I'd like to think of as a pseudo mountain, but like as tall as a ladder. And so to really sort of open up this sort of playful, polygonic and material energy up into these bigger scales, but also really be able to develop objects that build, right? So like much like we screw open our water bottle and we like assemble a table like to be able to interact with objects in a very practical way. So it's been super fun to work with David on that, and I'm really excited. I mean, David also kind of created these really fun polygon eyeglasses out of cardboard, but then also like 3D printed these little whatever, the thing that you put on your ear. So like they could come together and be built in real time during the show. So the show is really about exploring all of these interactions in real time, but developing those pieces was really fun with David. I'm working with Sharon Udo, who's a Nigerian American piano player and vocalist, incredibly intuitive artist. who became just kind of the perfect partner in finding a way to play with this hum, right? So like me, I'm trying to hum. It's not like a fixed melody. How do you take something that's so kind of personal and addressed to self, and find a musical collaborator who can kind of enter into that really, really personal space? So Sharon has been incredible. I've also, I have a lot of exposure to different South Asian music forms, and Sharon does not, but it's been really a fun practice to sort of get into this interlingual sonic space of talking about how certain ragas are developed, and like a certain mood around a ragam that can have a lot of sort of anger built into it, and to sort of share with Sharon ways in which perhaps Sharon can enter into that kind of relationship with scale, and we can create this mood that in some ways really speaks to my sort of subconscious South Asian, Indian musical influences, but is also so just organic and unique to me and Sharon. So just a lot of exciting things that I feel excited about.
Is this question specifically about this project, or are we talking about collaboration generally?
I think that you can do both or either.
Okay. I guess I'll start with a lot of my work appears to be solo work, but I think of it actually as collaborative. It's very much in collaboration with, I've said this already, the people in the space, the objects. Objects to me are not inanimate. They have a way of moving or of directing movement that is potent, which often I feel only as a listener to those objects, such as now. Working with Vin specifically, we've each occupied a variety of roles on the projects we worked on together. I think that's because we both have an interest in photography. I think Vin is very much more technically accomplished than I am in any sense in terms of photography and video editing. But we both shoot often. A few times. I have been second camera on his video projects. And our collaboration actually began because the Pivot Arts Festival had invited several people to do some artists in quarantine video festival thing, and they said, we can send someone to take the video for you if you need. And I was like, nope, I got it. I got my phone. I stick it on my water bottle, prop it against the wall. You want a 4-minute video? I hit record, and then 4 minutes later we are done. And then for some reason, it didn't, especially it was very early pandemic then. It was April 2020 when this was proposed. So I really thought that what they were saying was someone would come to your apartment, stand in the doorway, and hold a camera for you and press record if you need help with that or something. Sorry, this is getting really off.
Origins with Vin.
Right. And then at the time I was working, or I had this idea. I'd had this coat in my closet for a long time, and I sometimes find it's an enormous coat. It's kind of ridiculous. I call it refrigerator coat. And it's bright red, and I'd always wanted to make a dance for it. And that was one of my thoughts for that particular festival would be to make a dance with the coat. But I really wanted not a still camera, but someone with an eye on the other end to be able to shoot it in detail. And so that person wound up being Vin. He just came over to my apartment, and then 2 hours later we had a film. Actually, it might have taken a little more time on his part. But because he saw what I did with the coat, he said, I have this dress that he had made, actually also again for someone else. That was for Hedwig Dances, dance company in Chicago. They often work with objects as well, and Jan Partozek has done, like, I think 2 evening-length works based on Bauhaus principles of design. Okay, before I go off to, is it okay? And so the dress that he had made, which Jan did not want, was this dress. He described it to me as a yellow dress because Kandinsky had this thing like red square, yellow triangle, blue circle. So it was yellow triangle, and Vin was saying it's a yellow dress that pops open into a triangle whenever you make a small movement. And I was thinking it was going to be like explosively two-dimensional object. I would become like a triangle. So I was like, yes, definitely want this dress. Sorry, I can get into this a lot more post this talk. So I don't take up everyone's time. But the point is, like, I hadn't known that he made costumes, and it enabled us to like shift and keep talking about projects together.
It's ongoing. Seems to be the theme of this conversation. I have one more question for the three of you, and then I think we can take some questions from the audience. Each of you, lives and works here in Chicago now. Each of you have also lived in other places, geographic areas. Funnily enough, I think I realized that each of you has connections to the Bay Area in your past. I just wonder if being in Chicago, or if place in general informs how your works take shape.
As as the person who will probably talk about Chicago the least, I can go first. I think place is something that's like, my work is overall about our relationship with land, and thinking about the ways that land provide an understanding provide a way to understand sort of political systems that are embedded in the way that we see and understand the geography around us. But I think that the land that I grew up in is deeply informative for my projects. I grew up in West Virginia. It's in the middle of sort of coal field region of the United States. And a lot of my projects are kind of founded in thinking about extraction and different relationships that resemble that. So I think in that way, the land I grew up in is really informative for what my projects are exploring, but also other things like I grew up in communities where tall tales were really important. And so the structure of a tall tale from a semantic perspective is either 2 truths and a lie or 2 lies and a truth. And I think that way of understanding the world around us and this sort of storytelling capacity is also something that's been really, it was why I think I recognized photography as like a familiar friend. I was like, oh, I see 2 truths and a lie, 2 lies and a truth. I know you. So I think that these kind of, whether it's physical geographies or cultural geographies, for me, those kind of coming out of the Appalachian region of the United States or something that are, those are just sort of 2 ways that are quick. But I think that, I think that growing up in a community that was like, deeply influenced by these sort of extractive industries, I think I've always kind of understood land as something that was not like, hey, landscape, or like, oh, that's a nice view of the lake. It's like, what are the layers that are underneath that? Whether that's sort of the simple, thinking about what's underground, or thinking about all of these layers of politics and community and economy that are informing the way that we see the land. And I live in Chicago.
I can speak to this. So I grew up in Illinois, have been in different places, bopped here and there. But the last place I lived was in Berlin. And so living abroad, and this work was being, simmered and cooked and explored while I was in that space. And it was very particularly stimulating around a lot of the questions I had as it relates to colonization and like the sort of colonial, like the ways in which colonization are sort of embedded in the way Bharatanatyam as a dance form exists today. And also I think just in general in Europe, there's a particular, I've come up against a lot of particular, very sort of colonial energy, I think, as a response to my work situated in that place. And so that was really interesting and relevant and fed my process and fed a lot of my inquiries. But it also felt, one of the reasons I felt like I needed to come back here to Chicago in particular is because of the, just like the very particular sort of social experiment that the United States is, but also like Chicago in particular, like the very multiracial space that this town is. And because my work is really asking a lot of questions around positionality and where are we positioning ourselves and how do we understand our position, being in this, home is such a funny word. I can't use the word home. I'm not a very home anchored person, but being home in Chicago where we're always navigating and being enriched and being fed, but also being challenged by how we are relating to one another and how we show or don't show solidarity with one another. I think that Chicago and the people that are here and the particular sort of challenges and opportunities for, solving the apocalypse that exist here are really provocative and really present in like the wrestling of the questions that my project asks.
I guess I'll just say that I had my first dance jobs in the Bay Area. So, and I worked with a lot of people, including Kinetech Arts, which was a technology and dance and performance collaborative. And we often did devised work there. So I was often making my own choreography, if you want to call it choreography, or making my own material within the context of someone else's projects. Or in response to, when we first started, we were working a lot with like movement responsive projections, which I think probably has something to do with my interest in like site specificity and in the ways that environment shifts improvisation. When I came to Chicago, I've lived here continuously since 2015, although I've lived here before also. I just didn't really fit in with anybody else. Like I've often thought that if I'd remained in the Bay, I would have just happily been in other people's work forever. I mean, forever till now. But something about not fitting in made it necessary for me to create my own work here in Chicago.
Let's open it up for questions from the audience. If anyone has one, is there a mic in the audience, or I can hand you mine? Yeah.
Thank you all. This question is actually for Irene, because I had the pleasure of actually experiencing your work twice. First at the gala, that was this private event here, and then at the event that you did this past week. And I feel like like you were saying, the audience becomes such a interesting kind of element of the work, and the context were so different, especially like the kind of attention that people were, basically like at the gala, it was kind of like a cocktail party and people were doing their cocktail thing, even though you were doing like making all of this noise with the dress and then like on Thursday, I think there was like much more of a very kind of attentive audience that came like explicitly to see the work. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about like the difference in how you experience those pieces.
Thank you. Thank you for seeing Blue Alice twice. Yeah, they are really, really, really different experiences. Like one is much more, I'm expecting that I'll encounter people briefly, or that they might not notice me, or that I'll be in the background of their attention. And something that I actually felt really scared about presenting this work at the MCA was, I think initially it was advertised an event 2 to 3 p.m. And I thought, oh God, who's gonna wanna watch this for 1 whole hour? I mean, thank you so much. I mean, so I've shown this work also at 21C, and like I'll specify a time length, but not necessarily like describe it as an event. And when I feel like with an event, there needs to be a trajectory or a narrative that occurs. And you know, I was very like, oh, please tell people they're allowed to leave whenever they want. And also, as we're moving through the museum, we're still picking up people who might not have decided to attend a performance, but are sort of accidentally attending a performance. Or so, in doing work that, in my mind, is durational, there always is a narrative to be discovered. But in a lot of the projects that, like, I've done on my own that have been unannounced, or like that have gone on for like a length of time that anyone can come and go, like the only one kind of holding on to that narrative thread is me. Because we could say the same thing at the gala, like I did have a pathway that I traversed, or that we discussed in advance, and I would like go from here to there, and I would maybe pop up here, and I would take the stairs, and the stairs would be an event, and the stairs actually at the gala were like a total non-event because nobody went to the stairs except me. Yeah, but in the end, like the planning is quite similar in the sense that I know I'm starting here and I'm going to end up there, and then the activities that I encounter are going to be the episodes. And then because I thought, okay, we have to like sort of front load with a few activities for the performance this time, I added a few elements. Also, partly because I wasn't supposed to go into the galleries. So I knew that the usual interaction that I would have with the artworks on view might not be able to occur. So I brought some cards in that I had embellished with, I don't know if you got a chance to see, because also this did not work as I thought it would work, but it's all an experiment. I had embellished some playing cards with quotations that I had been collecting on the color blue, thinking, okay, well, it's now a piece that's entirely about color. I don't know if that came across. And then I wanted sort of these candies. I don't know if you had one. Did you have one? Which one did you have? Because like blue, what flavor is blue, right? Blue raspberry, but it's also mint. And then I was like, and we could have done like cotton candy. We could have done grape, blue, menthol. It could be like so many different things. And I thought, oh, that would just be like a fun alternate way of experiencing the color blue. But it is also different to be at a gala where you're like, I felt much more like, okay, I'm just like an eccentric guest at this party with no friends. Photobombing. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Any other questions?
Thanks. You've talked a little bit, sorry, I arrived late, so maybe this was covered, but the relationship with the geopolitical, so I appreciated that. Can any of you speak to what happens to your practice and the precision that you might be seeking in a public space, but a truly public space, as in live public art, such as what I've experienced with some of you in parks outdoors, where it's really the will of the people and your will coming together without it being mediated by an institution. I'm just interested in how you shift in that regard.
Well, my work has never been outside of an institution, so I'm eager to see it escape. But, you know, for me, New Normal is a really, like, one of the things I love about it is the way that it acts as kind of a container to shift around the contexts that are available. And so I think I was mentioning earlier that we presented the work in this atrium, and now we're on the stage. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting is the different kinds of, they're completely different interactions with an audience. In one, the audience is seated. In one, the audience is standing. In one, there's a sort of natural barrier. In another, there's not. And I think that the different kinds of interaction that allows for are really exciting for any work. In particular, this work really oscillates around care, aggression, illusion, and endurance. And so it really creates... I don't want to say too much because this is essentially the prelude to, it's like, I think many of you are about to see it, so I don't want to say too much, but I think that, I think I can't say more without giving out way too much. Apologies.
So you've touched on something that I'm very interested in because I've done quite a bit of work in museums where everything is highly regulated, especially me. And also done work, for instance, at High Concept Labs where I set out materials and invite people to come and create this work with me. So in one work, I often work with scores, so I think of these as like being sort of invitations to activity because, for instance, like my failed experiment with the cards, people often don't feel permitted to intervene in a performance, or they're not sure like what they're allowed to do. So if I present materials, are they allowed to touch? What are they allowed to do? And when people decide to make those choices, often it surprises even me, but I find it quite wonderful because I do my work in order to find out what will happen. It's super exciting to me to see it built in front of my eyes by others.
I'm like conflicted whether or not to respond to that question because I'm still like understanding the question. But I guess like the thread that I picked up on in terms of just like sharing work in a more outdoor or public, unmitigated space in a way versus like a more institutional space was kind of one of the curiosities. I think that like one of the questions that's embedded in that's like navigated in my project, it is sort of questions of legibility and also legitimacy. And I think that it's always interesting the way when work is presented in a certain institutional setting that it can kind of earn a kind of legitimacy, but then also it can earn a kind of like scrutiny. Because of like the politics of that legitimization kind of. And so I think that like in a lot of the questions that I ask in my project around like the dance form I was trained in and like the sort of like the messages that are embedded in that, I feel like there's also this sort of question of like when in which a person who is trained in a certain form, who is understood by certain institutional infrastructures as having a certain kind of value and then not value, but then eventually getting sort of presented. And then also, like there's a lot of questions around a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think that it's particularly poignant when it's then inserted into like onto the MCA stage. So, but TBD because we haven't seen it yet. So.
I have a question about how sound enters into your performances. I've only seen Jonas's, so I can only question that. But it's, but it's certain. So I'm curious. At a general level, I'm concerned. You've talked about movement and color. How does sound enter into your performance art in a particular way? And Jonas, I mean, at certain points, as the actors were performing, song broke out. How did you decide to use the sound to relate to what was going on with the movement? And that's for all of you, how you integrate sound.
Well, that's a great question because it actually bridges the last question too, which is one of the things that I was really excited about. I mean, I think sound played and song played has played a large part in the piece in both its presentation in public space and stage. But one of the things that's really wonderful about entering the stage space is being able to lean into the artifice that the theater creates. So a lot of the sound is kind of amplified and is attuned to create, at times aggressive environments, at times connection with the breath. But the songs in particular are something that are really important to New Normal. So with the vocal director that I worked with, we really mined a large history of both pop cultural music and political protest songs across a pretty wide range of history. And it was really important to kind of use the sonic elements or the vocal elements to connect to the different ways that protest has shifted across generations and the ways that we have a different vantage point on different generations of protest. So how do we feel about songs that were meant as protest in the 60s and 70s, looking back on them now? Are they still radical? What did they mean then? What do they mean now? And similarly, looking back even farther, the songs that are referenced go back, I think with what's included in what you would see today to the 20s and 30s. So I think for me, really, the vocal elements are really about thinking about two things. One is sort of generations of protest, and the other is thinking about how we both take and disavow agency.
Because I do a lot of work that is simply in a space, I'm often not adding sound to that space. The sound that is in the space is the sound of the piece. However, in Blue Alice, because of the materials that compose the dress itself makes a massive sound, which I consider one of the wonderful emergent properties because it wasn't something that like Vin and I had discussed about the dress. It's simply a property of tarp and mylar. And yet is such a huge part of how people perceive this piece and encounter it.
I love the sound piece. Oh my gosh, I loved it so much. And also as someone who got to see it a second time, the first time the visual was like so captivating, and the second time I was just like the sonic ocean waves. Like I was just like riding, I was like just on the shore with you, sort of, with all that sound. Yeah, I already think I spoke about sound, but I use my voice in vocalizations, both like sort of rhythmic syllabic stuff. I also hum. I drum on material. I drop props, and there's sound there, and then I have a lovely piano player working with me.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to wrap things up by thanking you all once again for sharing your work with us, for reflecting on it so thoughtfully. You know, we've covered a lot of interesting terrain, I think, with this conversation. We've talked about the necessary shifts that occur with improvisation, with audiences and spaces, between materiality and the body, working in public space and in institutions, challenging norms of how we engage with art. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much. And yes, there is one more performance in the series today at 2 p.m. I hope you'll join us downstairs in the theater for Jonas's New Normal. And please stay tuned for the future when we announce Anjul's future performance dates. Thank you all for being here.